Hercules Hernandez was one of the 80s most impressive powerhouses. He went from being Bobby Heenan's prized strongman to becoming a beloved blue-collar hero who fought against the million-dollar man's greed. At a time when size was everything, Hercules pushed his body to extremes, sculpting himself into a 275-pound superhuman through whatever means necessary. However, in 2004, Hercules would go to sleep and never wake up again. In 1956, Ray Hernandez Jr. was born in New York City. Long before he was known as Hercules, Ray's life started with deep sadness. When he was only 6, Ray lost his mom to cancer, a pain that would shape his whole life. Looking for a better life, Ray's dad moved the family from the busy streets of New York to sunny Tampa, Florida. There, Ray found what he was meant to do. The wrestling room at his high school became his favorite place. He was a natural, strong, quick, and better than most kids he faced. He won match after match, and people started to notice just how good he was. After finishing high school in 1974, Ray joined the Air Force. For 3 years, he learned what it meant to be tough. The military didn't just train his body, it made him mentally stronger too. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Hiro Matsuda was a famous Japanese wrestler known for being one of the hardest teachers in wrestling. But instead of breaking Ray, Matsuda saw his potential. Under Matsuda's tough training, Ray started to become something special. In 1979, he stepped into the ring for the first time as Hercules Hernandez. Florida and Texas were where Hercules learned the wrestling business. In small gyms and packed arenas, he showed everyone just how powerful he was. He could lift guys much bigger than him and move faster than anyone expected. Night after night, city after city, Hercules made a name for himself. He wasn't just another big guy in the ring, he was becoming a star, and everyone could see it. 1982 was the year Hercules really started making waves in wrestling. When he walked into the NWA Central States territory, nobody knew he'd soon become one of their biggest stars. This wasn't the WWE or the big leagues yet, but Central States was where many wrestling legends cut their teeth. Picture this. Hercules teams up with a tough guy named J.J. Robertson, and together they become an unstoppable force. Not once, but twice they grabbed those shiny tag team belts, beating up every team that stood in their way. But Hercules wasn't done. He also won the TV title, the belt you had to defend almost every week on television. For 6 long months, nobody could take that belt from him. Then came the feud that would change everything. Harley Race wasn't just any wrestler. He was a former world champion, one of the meanest and toughest men in the business. When these two giants of the ring started fighting, people couldn't look away. Every match was like watching 2 trucks crash into each other. The crowds got bigger, and wrestling fans across the country started hearing about this new powerhouse named Hercules. But the story gets even better. Enter Oliver Humperdinck, a manager known for controlling some of wrestling's best heels. He stuck his nose in Hercules' business, and things got personal real quick. The tension built and built until there was only one way to settle it: inside a steel cage. The cage match was something people still talked about years later. Imagine being locked inside a metal cage with 2 angry men who want to hurt you. That's what Hercules faced when he stepped in against Race, with Humperdinck lurking outside like a vulture. The match was brutal, with both men bleeding and battered. By the time it was over in early 1983, everyone knew this wasn't the last they'd hear of Hercules Hernandez. The cage match was more than just his goodbye to Central States. It was like a graduation. Hercules had proven he could hang with the best, and bigger territories were calling. As he walked out of that Kansas City arena one last time, bloody but unbowed, the wrestling world was starting to realize Hercules Hernandez wasn't just another muscle-bound wrestler. He was a force of nature ready to take over the sport. In late 1983, Hercules took his talents across the ocean to Japan, where All Japan Pro Wrestling fans got their first taste of his raw power. Japanese wrestlers were known for hitting hard and showing no mercy, and Hercules fit right in. Night after night, he proved he could hang with the toughest wrestlers in the world. But America was calling him back, and Jim Crockett Promotions had big plans. They paired him with the legendary Jody Hamilton as the Masked Assassins, one of wrestling's most feared tag teams. Hercules became Assassin number 2, And at the very first Starrcade, wrestling's biggest night of the year, they beat Rufus R. Jones and Bugsy McGraw in a match that had fans on their feet. The mask wouldn't last forever, though. Jimmy Valiant, the Boogie Woogie Man, had other plans. In a wild match that had the crowd going crazy, Valiant ripped off Hercules' mask, exposing his identity to the world. But Hercules wasn't done with masks just yet. Moving to Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling, he became Mr. Wrestling 2. Big shoes to fill since the original Mr. Wrestling was a legend in the South. But soon enough, Hercules went back to being himself. And that's when things really got interesting. He started picking fights with the biggest names around, including the tough-as-nails hacksaw Jim Duggan. His next stop was Devastation Inc., where he became more dangerous than ever. In championship wrestling from Florida, he proved just how dominant he could be by winning not one, but 2 titles. He was on top of the world until a real-life fight with Wahoo McDaniel changed everything. Wahoo wasn't just any wrestler. He was a former football player known for being one of the legitimately toughest men in the business. After the dust settled from that fight, Hercules needed a change of scenery. He headed to the beaches of Puerto Rico, joining the World Wrestling Council. The island fans were about to see what this powerhouse could really do, and they had no idea what was coming their way. In Puerto Rico, where wrestling was treated like a real sport and fans took everything seriously, Hercules found a new playground for his intense style. In late 1985, the biggest wrestling company in the world had its eyes on Hercules. Vince McMahon was buying up all the best talent, and now he wanted the Man Mountain from Tampa. In November, Hercules stormed onto WWF television with the legendary Freddie Blassie in his corner. Blassie wasn't called the fashion plate of professional wrestling for nothing. He made sure Hercules looked like $1,000,000. Just months after his debut, Hercules found himself in the spotlight at WrestleMania II, Wrestling Super Bowl. His opponent, none other than Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, one of the most talented wrestlers in the world. The Los Angeles sports arena was packed to the rafters as these two went to war. Though Hercules lost, he proved he belonged on wrestling's biggest stage. But wrestling is a roller coaster, and Hercules was about to hit some bumps. When Blassie retired, a storyline saw Hercules sold to manager Slick. Without the guidance of Blassie, things weren't the same. In the crowded WWF mid-card, where every wrestler was fighting for TV time and fan attention, Hercules struggled to stand out. Then came the moment that changed everything. Late 1986, and the wrestling world was shocked when Slick sold Hercules' contract to one of the greatest managers in history, Bobby the Brain Heenan. This wasn't just a manager change, it was a complete transformation. Gone was the old Hercules with his Roman gladiator outfit and classic wrestling style. In his place emerged something much darker, much more dangerous. Now he carried a heavy steel chain to the ring, swinging it like a weapon while fans scrambled to get out of the way. His body changed too. He got bigger, more ripped, more intimidating. The new Hercules didn't just want to win matches. He wanted to hurt people. Under Heenan's guidance, this new version of Hercules became one of the most feared men in wrestling. The Brain knew exactly how to showcase his monster, putting him in matches where his raw power and newfound aggression could shine. Every time that chain rattled, opponents knew they were in for a long, painful night. The transformation was complete. Hercules wasn't just playing a monster anymore. He had become one. The night of November 29, 1986 wasn't just another Saturday night. It was the moment Hercules Hernandez stood face-to-face with wrestling's biggest star. Saturday night's main event wasn't your regular wrestling show. It aired on NBC in prime time, meaning millions of people were watching. And on this night, they were about to see Hercules challenge the unstoppable Hulk Hogan for wrestling's biggest prize. The energy in the arena was electric. Hogan, with his 24-inch pythons and red and yellow colors, was the hero America had fallen in love with. But Hercules, now bigger and meaner than ever, with that steel chain in hand and Bobby Heenan screaming instructions from ringside, looked like he might just be the one to dethrone the champion. The match itself was a war of power. These weren't technically skilled wrestlers doing flip and rolls. This was two muscle-bound giants trying to tear each other apart. Then came the moment that had everyone holding their breath. Hercules trapped Hogan in his dreaded torture rack. The backbreaker hold that had broken so many others now had the champion writhing in agony. The crowd went wild. Could this be it? Was the immortal Hulk Hogan about to tap out? But if wrestling had taught us anything, it was to never count Hogan out. As fans chanted his name, as kids screamed for their hero, Hogan did what he always did. He hulked up. Fighting through the pain, he escaped the torture rack. Minutes later, the legendary leg drop sealed Hercules' fate. The 3 count echoed through the arena. Yet something strange happened that night. Even in defeat, Hercules' stock rose. Going toe-to-toe with Hulk Hogan, nearly making him submit, proved what many had suspected. Hercules Hernandez belonged at the top. He might not have won the title, but he'd won something perhaps more valuable: respect. From that night on, everyone knew. When Hercules' music hit, you were in for a real fight. In wrestling, some feuds are business, but others, they're personal. The war between Hercules and Billy Jack Haynes was as personal as it gets. These two monsters had been battling across America long before they hit the WWF. And now, they were about to settle things on wrestling's biggest stage. The match that lit the powder keg happened on Wrestling Challenge. Bobby Heenan, always the master of mind games, started bragging that his man Hercules had perfected Haynes' own finishing move, the full Nelson. It was like stealing another man's signature, his bread and butter. Haynes had made countless wrestlers submit to that hold. And now, here was Hercules, claiming he did it better. When Haynes finally got his hands on Heenan, shoving the manager in frustration, Hercules struck like a snake. The clothesline nearly took Haynes' head off, but it was what came next that really got people talking. Hercules locked in that full Nelson right there on television, making a statement that echoed through the wrestling world. Anything you can do, I can do better. Then came WrestleMania III, the biggest wrestling show in history. The Pontiac Silverdome was packed with over 93,000 screaming fans. While Hogan and Andre might have been the main event, Hercules and Haynes were ready to steal the show. These two bulls couldn't be contained by the ring. They spilled out onto the floor, neither man backing down, neither willing to lose. When the referee counted both men out, it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. What happened next showed just how dark Hercules had become. That steel chain, his newest weapon of choice, turned the tough-as-nails Billy Jack Haynes into a crimson mask. The sight of Haynes' blood dripping onto the Silverdome floor told everyone this feud wasn't over. The final chapter was written in their chain match weeks later. 2 men, 1 chain, no mercy. In the end, it was Hercules standing tall, proving once and for all who the tougher man was. He hadn't just beaten Billy Jack Haynes. He'd taken his best move, his dignity, and finally, his shot at revenge. In the brutal world of 1980s wrestling, feuds didn't get much more personal than this. The world of wrestling changed in early 1988 when 2 of the most powerful men in the business came face to face. On an episode of Superstars, The Ultimate Warrior, this muscle-bound force of nature painted in neon colors, stormed down to confront Hercules. What happened next became wrestling legend, a tug-of-war over Hercules' trusted steel chain. Picture this moment. 2 human mountains, veins bulging, muscles straining, pulling that chain between them like they were trying to move mountains. The crowd was on their feet. They'd never seen anything like it. Then suddenly, snap! The chain broke clean in half, sending both men staggering backward. While Gorilla Monsoon and the other commentators gave all the credit to Warrior, Jesse the Body Ventura saw it differently. He argued it took both men's incredible power to break that steel chain. And he might have been right. This wasn't just about a broken chain, though. This was about 2 of wrestling's strongest forces about to collide. You could cut the tension with a knife every time these 2 crossed paths. It all led to WrestleMania IV, the biggest stage in wrestling. The match was everything fans hoped for: raw power versus raw power, strength versus strength. 2 unstoppable forces meeting head-on. Just when it looked like Hercules might have had the win locked up with his devastating full Nelson hold, the Warrior showed why he was becoming one of wrestling's fastest rising stars. He powered out of the hold that had finished so many others, turned the tables, and pinned Hercules in a finish that had people talking for weeks. Some said Hercules' shoulders weren't down. Others claimed the ref counted too fast. But one thing was clear. These two warriors had put on a display of strength rarely seen in professional wrestling. Late 1988 brought the moment that would change Hercules forever. The $1 Million Man, wrestling's richest and most arrogant superstar, stood in the ring waving money around, claiming he'd bought Hercules like property. Bobby Heenan, always looking for a quick buck, had sold Hercules' contract without even telling him. But the $1 Million Man was about to learn that some things money just can't buy. For the first time since joining the WWF, something awakened in Hercules. The man who had terrorized opponents with his chain, who had made enemies of fan favorites, found his own voice. Standing tall in the ring, he ripped up the contract and spoke words that had the crowd erupting. "No man owns Hercules." The battle lines were drawn. The $1 Million Man, furious that someone would dare reject his money, sent his bodyguard Virgil to teach Hercules a lesson. But at Saturday night's main event, with millions watching on NBC, Hercules wasn't fighting for just another win. He was fighting for his dignity. The match against Virgil became more than wrestling. It was about a man proving he couldn't be bought, couldn't be owned, couldn't be controlled. The war wasn't over, though. At Survivor Series, one of WWF's biggest events of the year, their paths crossed again. While Hercules might have cost himself a shot at the world title against Randy Savage by letting Ted get in his head, he got the last laugh when his distraction led to the $1 Million Man's elimination. The crowd roared. Money might buy a lot of things, but it couldn't buy victory over a man fighting for his freedom. In the unforgiving world of wrestling, momentum is everything, and by 1989, Hercules was losing his. His feud with Haku, the savage wrestler from the South Pacific, should have been epic. Both men were known for their raw power and intensity, and when they clashed at WrestleMania III, Hercules walked away with the win. But something was different now. The victory felt hollow, like a peak that came too late. The WWF was changing. New monsters were emerging from the shadows, and suddenly the man who once struck fear into opponents found himself on the wrong side of history. Earthquake arrived like a natural disaster, a 468-pound force of destruction that made Hercules look small by comparison. At WrestleMania VI, the same event where the Ultimate Warrior would dethrone Hulk Hogan, Earthquake didn't just beat Hercules, he crushed him. Then there was Mr. Perfect Curt Hennig, a rising star who represented everything the new WWF was becoming: younger, faster, more athletic. The matches against Perfect showed just how much the wrestling landscape had shifted. Hercules, once the unstoppable force who had gone toe-to-toe with Hulk Hogan, was now being used to make newer stars look good. It was a cruel twist of fate. The same power that had made Hercules a feared competitor now seemed outdated. Wrestling was evolving, and the gladiator from Tampa was being left behind. The crowds that once gasped at his strength now saved their biggest reactions for the new generation of superstars. The mighty Hercules had become what every wrestler fears most: just another name on the card. The story of Hercules in this period wasn't just about losing matches. It was about watching the wrestling world change around you. The same ring where he'd once made legends fear his chain now belonged to a new breed of wrestler. And try as he might, Hercules couldn't find his place in this new era. The summer of 1990 brought one last reinvention for Hercules. Teaming with Paul Roma, a young, athletic star, they became Power and Glory, a combination of raw strength and explosive speed. With the devious Slick back in their corner, it looked like Hercules might have found his ticket back to the top. Their feud with the high-flying Rockers set the wrestling world on fire. At SummerSlam, Power and Glory proved they were more than just muscle, outmaneuvering and overpowering Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. The win had them eyeing bigger prizes, specifically the Hart Foundation's tag team titles. For a moment, it seemed like Hercules had found his second wind. Then came WrestleMania VII and the Legion of Doom. In less than 60 seconds, the Road Warriors demolished Power and Glory. It wasn't just a loss, it was a statement. The era of Power and Glory was over before it really began. When Roma left the WWF, Hercules' spiral continued. Once a man who had gone toe-to-toe with Hulk Hogan, he now found himself on the wrong end of matches with rising stars. Jim Neidhart, Big Boss Man, Sid Justice, the losses piled up. Even a promising 40-minute showing in the 1991 Royal Rumble couldn't turn the tide. By 1992's Rumble, Hercules was tossed out like an afterthought. The end came at Madison Square Garden, wrestling's most famous arena. How fitting that the place where so many legends were made would be where Hercules had his last WWF match. Sid Justice, a monster of the new generation, destroyed him with a powerbomb, but Hercules wouldn't go out lying down. After the 3 count, he stood up, stared down his opponent, and stormed off to the locker room. Even in defeat, he kept his pride. It was a dramatic exit for a man who had once been one of wrestling's most feared competitors. Hercules might not have reached the heights some expected, but from that cage match with Harley Race to the chain, breaking with Ultimate Warrior, he'd given fans moments they'd never forget. In an era of larger-than-life characters, Hercules Hernandez had lived up to his mythological namesake, a true titan of the ring. After 7 years in the WWF spotlight, Hercules wasn't done. He was just getting started on a whole new adventure. When he showed up in WCW, fans wondered what this powerhouse would do next. But it was in Japan where Hercules would find his final glory days in wrestling. Japanese fans had always appreciated power wrestlers differently than American audiences, and when Hercules arrived in New Japan Pro Wrestling, they treated him like the force of nature he was. Teaming with Scott Norton, another American powerhouse, they formed the Jurassic Powers, a name that perfectly captured their prehistoric level of strength. This wasn't just another tag team. These were 2 of the strongest men in wrestling, destroying everything in their path. The Jurassic Powers didn't just compete, they dominated. When they captured the NJPW Tag Team Championships, it proved Hercules could still go with the best. Japanese tournaments were known for being incredibly physical, and Hercules showed he could hang with anyone, adapting his power style to match the hard-hitting Japanese approach. As the 90s wore on, Hercules took his talents across the globe. From small gymnasiums to packed arenas, he wrestled wherever the road took him. The independent circuit might not have had the glamour of WWF, but it had something else: freedom. Here, Hercules could wrestle his style, his way, without corporate restrictions. By 1999, after 20 years of body slams, backbreakers, and battles across the globe, Hercules Hernandez hung up his boots. He'd lived up to his mythological namesake, traveling the world like the hero of old, leaving his mark on every territory he touched. From Florida to Japan, from WWF to the Indies, Hercules had done what few wrestlers manage. He'd truly seen and done it all. His career ended, but no one expected Hercules' final battle would come so soon. On March 6, 2004, in his home in Tampa, Raymond Fernandez went to sleep and never woke up. At just 47 years old, the man who had been strength personified was gone, another victim of the unforgiving wrestling lifestyle. Heart disease was listed as the cause, with years of steroid use likely playing its part in stealing away a man who should have had decades left to live. While today's WWE has one of the strictest drug policies in sports, the 1980s were a different world entirely. Mario Mancini's story about Hercules Hernandez paints a vivid picture of just how loose those early drug testing procedures were. Picture this scene backstage: Hercules approaching his fellow wrestler with an urgent request for help passing a drug test. The simplicity of how they beat the system is almost shocking. No officials in the testing room meant wrestlers could easily use clean urine from their colleagues. When Hercules approached Mancini, knowing he was clean, it wasn't even a complex scheme. Just one wrestler helping another avoid detection. The most telling part of Mancini's revelation was about Vince McMahon's priorities at the time. Steroids weren't the main concern. McMahon's real worry was about social drugs. As Mancini pointed out, if they'd cracked down on marijuana, they wouldn't even have had enough wrestlers to run TV tapings. This environment helps explain the tragic toll on wrestlers like Hercules. In an era where steroid use was treated almost casually, where drug tests could be fooled with a friendly favor, many wrestlers paid the ultimate price. The ripple effects of these loose policies would eventually force wrestling to change. But for stars like Hercules, these changes came too late. It wasn't just about breaking rules, it was about survival in a business where size and strength meant everything. The pressure to maintain that superhuman physique, to be larger than life night after night, led many wrestlers down this dangerous path. For Hercules, like many others of his era, the long-term consequences of these choices would prove devastating. The loss hit the wrestling world hard, but it was his family who felt it most deeply. His wife Debbie and 7 children were left to carry on without their hero, their provider, their father. In the harsh world of professional wrestling, where the show must always go on, families often pay the highest price. Hercules had given everything to the business, including, perhaps, his life. Looking back at Raymond Fernandez's journey, from that young boy who lost his mother in New York to the powerhouse who broke chains with the Ultimate Warrior, his story reads like something out of mythology. Like his namesake, the ancient hero Hercules, he possessed incredible strength but couldn't escape his fate. From the territories to the WWF, from Japan to Puerto Rico, he lived 1,000 lifetimes in those 47 years. The wrestling world has changed since Hercules' day. The steel chains, the torture racks, the raw displays of power, they belong to a different era now. But for those who saw him in his prime, who witnessed his battles with Hulk Hogan, his defiance of the $1 Million Man, his wars with Billy Jack Haynes, they'll never forget the sight of Hercules making his way to the ring, that chain in hand, ready for battle. In the end, Raymond Fernandez was more than just Hercules. He was a father, a husband, a friend, and a wrestler who gave everything he had to entertain the fans. While he may have left us too soon, his legacy lives on in the memories of those who watched him perform, those who shared the ring with him, and most importantly, in the family he left behind. Like all great heroes, his story serves as both inspiration and warning, a testament to human strength and a reminder of human fragility. Don't miss our documentary on Mr. Perfect and how he never got his world title moment. Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.